As a member of Black Generation X, I was blessed to have grown up around persons who had gone to college, served in the military, and worked in a variety of structured environments. The unfortunate part was that I didn't necessarily have a lot of access to people who didn't work in those environments that were unstructured, like running your own business. So I want to talk to you a little bit today about what it means to grow up in a situation where you have generational influences, figuring out how to move from survival mode to thriving, and also moving to an unexpected transition into spaces that were completely unrelated and unexperienced for you. If you grew up in an environment, and I'm looking at it from the standpoint of me being a member of Black Generation X, for me, I was often moved and motivated by the experiences and by the examples set by the people I looked up to. So if for me, my immediate scenario was my mom and her 5 brothers, as well as my dad's mom and my grandparents. And so what I realized, looking back, a lot of my life decisions were shaped by the models that they set. And what do I mean by that? Well, for me, all of my uncles and my mom went to college. Both of my grandmothers went to college. So for me, going to college wasn't so much that people told me, you got to go to college. It's that the people who I looked up to, that's what they did. Same thing. Of my 5 uncles on my mom's side, 4 of them served in the military. My dad's brother served in the military. My grandfather was a World War II vet. So again, they were the ones who I looked to. So for me, it wasn't as if people said to me, you better join the military or you better go to college. It was that the people around me that I looked up to, this is what they did. And it's important to remember this because a lot of times what happens, we don't think about the fact that sometimes the people you look up to may be the ones who shape you even without saying anything. So for me, I didn't have any of those family members and those who served and those who went to college and worked in these structured environments coming to me and saying, hey, if you're thinking about moving in a particular pathway, this is the pathway you should follow. Well, for me, I looked at them as an example, knowing in my mind, I looked up to these individuals. They chose this path. So obviously, I trust their decision making. As such, that is the path that I should consider. And so even though they didn't give me specific instructions to move in this particular way, I relied heavily on what I saw in terms of how they moved. But one of the things that we don't talk about when making the transition from the Black silent generation, the Black baby boomers, to the Black Generation X, is that there were 2 competing realities that we had to face. For those who were a member of silent generation and the people who were part of the boomer generation, for them, it was about breaking down barriers, overcoming obstacles, and creating lanes that was very different from what they experienced. Almost the vast majority of those people, especially if you're a baby boomer, especially a Black baby boomer or a Black silent generation, you grew up in a world where there were inherent obstructions in terms of your ability to do things. So you had to learn resolve. You had to learn resilience. You had to learn independence, and you had to learn how to face adversity. And those were the inherent skills that they embedded into us as a member of Black Generation X. So we came into it with having parents who taught us about resiliency, who taught us about independence, who taught us about how to face adversity. And those would be the foundational tools that we used as we moved forward. But keep in mind, we had 2 different realities where they were in the process of breaking down barriers and going through those initial heartaches and transitional wise, especially as you started rolling into the early 70s. Our generation went straight in without those impediments in front of us. So as such, we came in with the various tools that was provided to us, going into a very wholly different world order than what they experienced. And I've said this repeatedly. Unfortunately, for the silent generation and for the baby boomers, they couldn't prepare us for a world that they hadn't seen yet. They were breaking down barriers. They were dealing with adversity. They were creating a world order for us so that we would never have to, or at least significantly not have to go through what they went through. Problem is that in doing so, they had no idea what type of barriers or what type of things that we were going to face because they hadn't seen it yet. That wasn't a knock on them as a generation. It was just a reality that there were certain adversities that they hadn't faced yet. Which brings me to this unique thing that I call the structure trap. this is where, and I'm not going to speak for all members of Black Generation X. I can only talk about for me. For me, when I was looking back at the people that I looked up to, I looked at their success through the lens of the structure they went through. Remember, of my 5 uncles, 4 of them had served in the military, including my uncle, my dad's uncle. So that was 5. So out of the 6 uncles I had who had an influence on me, 5 of them served. And that meant that they were moving into an environment that was a structured environment. My grandfather served 20, including World War II. And so again, I'm looking at him in his movement through a structured environment. All of my uncles, with the exception of, no, all of them went to college. And when they went to college, they then transitioned into various structured environments. And for those of you who are like, what do you mean by structure? It can be anything from working for a county, working for a state, or even working for the feds, because almost every one of them ended up working in some governmental capacity. And why is that important? Well, what happens is that when I'm growing up as a member of Black Generation X, a couple of things resonate. One, I see the value of getting a college degree. And a college degree meaning that me getting a college degree would open the doors for me to be able to create a type of socioeconomic environment for me that would allow me the ability to be able to live comfortably and to transition smoothly into a particular space. And more importantly, watching them, I was also getting the realization how important it was to move into these structured environments where there were certain predictabilities that you could expect. So even though no one told me to do this, in my mind, just watching the people around me, the people I looked at, not just my uncles, not just my grandparents, not just my mom and my dad, his people, but also the various other Black professionals that I saw growing up, they all worked in kind of a structured environment. So in my mind, all I saw was you get your college degree, and that's a gateway into these structured environments. You're in these structured environments, and they give you the ability to be able to live the life that you want to in terms of comfort and predictability. But this is where it gets a little tricky, because when I turned 38, I was at a point where I then had to make a decision about going out on my own and creating my own opportunities for myself. That was terrifying. Now, going out on your own and creating your own business on its face is scary enough. So I don't think anybody would dispute that. What becomes scary is that when the foundation for your growth and your basis by which you move professionally has been focused on moving in established, structured environment, going into a space where you are literally doing on your own underscored so many things that I did not necessarily think I was prepared for. Well, what do you mean by that? By the time I had actually turned 38, I had worked for the state for 3 years. I had served in the military for 3 years. I had worked for a private company for 6. So we're talking about, in every instance, whether it be the private sector or the public sector, working in a structured environment where I basically had someone who was responsible for all of the things that were necessary to allow me to live in that environment. They took care of the insurance. They took care of workers' comp. They took care of the ability to have leave. They took care of the investments. Those were the things that they were handling. They were also handling any of the intangibles or unexpected things that I did not know about. I was oblivious to those things because in a structured environment, I was limited to doing what I needed to do for myself, for the job, and all of the other external things I didn't have to face. Now, going out on my own, I was in this world environment where I realized really quickly I had not prepared for a reality where I had to provide those things for myself. I now found myself in a situation where I had to deal with my own bookkeeping, my own marketing. I had to worry about my property, business licensing insurance for my bar license, business insurance for my business. I'm now having to worry about I'm going to have to basically take care of not only ensuring that I keep the doors open to my company, but the doors open to my house. And these were things that were new to me. And what they also underscored is that I was woefully unprepared for this reality. Because again, let me stress this again. I had operated under the space of what it meant to be in a structured environment. This new space that I found myself in when I opened up my own practice was completely foreign to me. And what it underscored was that because most of the things that I looked up to, most of the foundational things, and even the tools that were provided to me was based on moving through a structured environment. This was something that I was completely unprepared for. And suddenly I found myself realizing that all of the things that I had been used to was based on models of what I had thought you needed to succeed. So going into a space where I now had to worry about trying to succeed on my own terms was frightening. And I realized that I didn't actively have anybody I could turn to initially that I could turn to kind of help guide me about these things. So now I didn't know what advancement would look like under this new model. I didn't know what sustainability and consistency looked like under this model. I didn't know what it meant in terms of infrastructure under this model because I had to figure this out on my own. And what I also didn't realize was that I hadn't had the opportunity to properly educate myself, or I wasn't exposed around people when I came up who literally could have provided me examples for how to do this on my own. So this even underscored how much more terrified I was. But you know what I had? I was Generation X. And you know what Generation X is? We are the independent generation. And so the one thing that I learned during those early formative years, even coming out of high school and into college, is I knew how to survive. That was a skill that I learned really quickly from watching my mother move, watching my family members move. I learned that. So as a member of Black Generation X and Generation X, I knew two fundamental things. I knew how to be independent, and I knew how to survive. And so as a result, I was able to go out on my own and be able to operate on my own because I instinctively reverted to survival mode. What do I need to do to keep the lights on? What do I need to do to make sure that my house doesn't get foreclosed on? What do I need to do to make sure I don't put myself in any type of legal peril? And those were from the skills that I had received and that I had earned and developed during all those formative years as I was moving through the young professional ranks and even out of college and so forth, because those were skills that came to me naturally, because those were the skills that I was used to seeing. But what I realized is that once I started operating my own business, that I was so locked into that skill set I was familiar with that I didn't entertain the possibility that I could evolve into other skill sets, meaning the ability to thrive. I had spent so much time in survival mode, never thinking about thriving mode. So I didn't think about the vision for the future, goals for more, aspirational things that I wanted to attain that my company could be a vehicle for. And more importantly, since I stayed in survival mode, I never gave myself the opportunity to be in what I call arrival mode. I never sat there and said to myself, I've arrived. Not saying that I'm just big and bad, but arrived at the fact of recognizing that I had now attained the skills to be able to successfully run my practice. Because as a result, when you're running your business, you're almost always under a constant state of threat because you always are mindful that at any given moment something could happen that could possibly cause some derailment of what you're doing. But it never crossed me, because I did this for almost 10 years, it never crossed me into year 4, year 5, year 6, that I had faced so many adversities and I had overcome every one of them, and I never backed down because I stayed in survival mode. I never moved into thriving or the rival mindset of saying, I've arrived. I have demonstrated I know what it takes. If nothing else, if something happens, no one can take away the 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years of experience I've had running my own business. And what I realized is that I continued moving with the skills that I was most comfortable with, which came from survival skills. But I also recognized, and it took me a minute to realize, that I hadn't developed entrepreneurial skills. And as an entrepreneur, and in this instance, and you would say to yourself, what do you mean? What I realized is that I was okay working for myself, which comes with survival skills, but I didn't realize that I needed to move into running your own business, which is entrepreneurial. And because of that, I stayed in that I'm working for myself survival mode probably longer than I should have, when I should have been moving into entrepreneurial when there was more opportunities for me to grow, because I had already proven to myself and proven that I could be a successful business person. So why am I sharing this now? Because I want younger generation. And one of the things the younger generation I'm seeing now is a lot of the younger generation, they're in thriving mode. Their mode is we're trying to thrive today. And that I can truly respect. And I don't want them to have to go through the survival mode or the survival mindset that I had to experience. And again, That's not trying to say that I didn't learn anything from the experiences that I went through. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm effectively saying is that I want you to not think you have to do it alone. Because I can tell you, one of the things about Generation X is that we learned independence, but part of that independence came with the belief that we had to do a lot of this on our own. When we didn't necessarily have to. So when I get young people reaching out to me now, or even younger professionals who are a few years younger than me, asking about my mindset about certain things, I have to keep reminding myself that they are coming to me so that they don't have to waste any of the time that I may have done, because they can take advantage of having access to me and the knowledge that I gained from the experiences that I underwent. And so I want to make sure that it's great if you have survival skills, but I want you to be able to think about from a survival mindset and an entrepreneurial mindset. Because for me, it was just a survivor mindset, and as opposed to the entrepreneurial. And a good part of that, as I indicated earlier, was because the people who were my examples moved in a particular space, and so I understood how to move in that space. But once I moved into something that was completely unrelated, and more, unfortunately, I didn't have a lot of exposure to, I didn't necessarily know how to move. And so I could only rely upon the skills that I developed to help me move in a particular way as opposed to this way. So I say that so that future generations, when they ask the question, which is why I always love when people call and ask me about stuff, because I don't want you to be in that mode. I want you to take full advantage of having access to someone who can say, yeah, this is what I experienced. I don't want you to have to go through this. As a member of Generation X, we are the bridge generation. I often joke, and we often see people talk about, why don't we talk about Generation X as much? The reality is the reason why we don't talk about it, it's easy for generations after us to kind of talk about the generations before us, because we are the generation that has the common bond. And this is the kind of funny thing. For the baby boomers and the silent generation, they raised us. So they're not really going to talk about us because all the lessons and things we learned from them. Millennials, Gen Zs, they came after us. So all the things that they learned, they came from our generation. So the only thing they can do is kind of jump over us and go to the previous one, because they can't relate to boomers and silent generation, and that generation can't relate to Gen Z and Gen Alpha. We can. So we understand everything that comes from that. And as a result, it has been my firm commitment and my firm desire to make sure that future generations get the benefit of what we got. The prior generation got the benefit, we got the benefit of them kicking butt and taking names and breaking down barriers to allow us to move in spaces that they had not had exposure to. We have exposure to that. And so that meant that all of the exposure that we came from moving into these brand new spaces, we had to learn new lessons that our prior generations, the boomers and the silent generation, didn't have access to. We're now learning those lessons, and our responsibility is to pass on what we've learned to the millennials and Gen Z and Gen Alpha. For all my Gen Xers out there, and especially my Black Gen Xers, share with me. Tell me about the things that you learned from the prior generation that applied to circumstances that you moved in, and tell me, were there new scenarios that they hadn't experienced that you had to kind of figure out on your own, and how you learned various lessons that you passed on to future generations. We are the bridge. And just as we provide a bridge back to let the older generations know how much we appreciate what they've done for us, it's also our responsibility to take the things we've learned to provide a blueprint so that future generations can benefit from everything we went through for the first time, so that this way they don't have to go through that as well.